I'm Mathilde Stevens, and today is 22nd of March 2022. And today I am talking with Doug Baker about his time with Corrymeela. And maybe, Doug, you would tell us a bit about who you are, where you're from, and how you first got involved with Corrymeela.
I'm originally from the west coast of the US, Washington State. And when I was at university in Seattle, I participated in a program in 1970 where through a church locally, students were sent in small groups to different places in the US or around the world where they would be stretched and learned, and where hopefully they might be able to contribute something. And when you applied for that, you had to say that if you were accepted, you would go wherever you were sent to do whatever assigned. And they didn't tell you what the possibilities might be. But myself and three others in June of 1970 came to Northern Ireland. And over the course of the summer, several things happened. Number one, the level of violence in the Troubles began to go up fairly dramatically early in the summer. Secondly, we were assigned to work with a number of different projects over the summer that would have been very early cross-community youth projects or diversionary projects, adventure playgrounds, things like that in lower income areas. And these would have been set up through the various church youth officers working together at that time from the different denominations. And toward the end of that summer I had met quite a few people associated with Corrymeela in the course of the summer. But toward the end of the summer was my first time to actually be at the center in Ballycastle for a week with children, I believe, from different children's homes and who were there on holiday and all the activities. So that's how I first came in contact with Corrymeela. And I think it was interesting for me that I first met people from the community, not at the center, but in terms of things they were doing in the wider society that summer. And so from my perspective, really from the very beginning, the Corrymeela Center was always viewed, in my mind, as a resource for what Corrymeela, the community of people, were doing, rather than that the community of people, Corrymeela, were a support group for the operation of the center.
Yeah. Yes, that's very interesting. This word of being a resource came also up with Billy Kane when he talked about getting involved with youth work. So that's interesting you have the same memory.
Yes.
And so did you then go, but you went back to the States?
I went back, well, toward the end of that summer, a couple of the church youth officers who had been involved in several of the programs I'd been part of took me aside one evening and said, would you ever think of coming back for a longer time? Because we would love to see that if you were open to it. And I really didn't know if they were just being, flattering, polite, or, if they had any serious intention. The truth is that summer affected me very deeply in lots of ways. And I would love to have stayed longer. I would love to have come back. So, they were speaking about something that was already in my mind, but I didn't think was a possibility. When I was back finishing my studies in the US, university level, I received that message from them again a couple of times. And so I wrote back, I said, are you just being nice, or do you actually think there's a role for people from the outside? And if so, what do you think that might be? And I got a reply back saying, yes, we do. And here is a role we would like you to consider. And that was in coming up to Christmas of 71. And the position they were suggesting was to work part-time at the Presbyterian Center Chaplaincy at Queen's University, with a focus on inter-chaplaincy work and things that were involving the students out in the community as well. But the other part-time was to be with the youth office of the Presbyterian Church in Ireland. And when I arrived, which was, I left the US in January, at the end of January, the day after Bloody Sunday, to come to Northern Ireland. So that was, again, an incredible timing of things that were happening. But when I got started in the role, Gordon Gray, who at that time was the Presbyterian youth officer, said, I could easily absorb all of your energy, all of the time that I have allocated for you, into the ordinary things in Presbyterian youth work. But I don't want to do that. I think your role should be to be involved in some of the cross-community things that are going on between the churches and at youth level. And very early on in that, Ray Davey spoke with Gordon, I think, and said, you know, it would be very good if some of Doug's time could be used in connection with Corrymeela youth work. And so that's what happened, was that although I wasn't at that time assigned to Corrymeela, working with Corrymeela, I was working alongside on some very early cross-community youth work, primarily between Sandy Row and Turf Lodge, as one of the parts of my role then. And it became one of the most meaningful to me, and probably expanded in time, you know, as the group grew in number and the kind of things we were doing with them changed as well. So about every 6 weeks, I would have been at the center for a weekend with a group of young people during that. And I was, at that point in my life, I was here for about a year and a half, a little over a year and a half.
Right. So you brought young people, but they weren't particularly church young people. No, they were.
No, they were, well, they were an eclectic collection of people. The ones from Sandy Row were initially 4 or 5 boys who had been in one of the cross-community projects in 1970. And it was following up on relationships I already had with some of those youth. And then the ones from Turf Lodge were initially, they weren't only from Turf Lodge, but the Turf Lodge ones were because in the summer of 72, there was another group from Seattle who were here for the summer, and I had responsibility for, along with others, for their program that summer. And a couple of them were placed in a group, a youth project or a youth center in Turf Lodge. And at the end of that summer, we took a group of young people from Turf Lodge to Corrymeela for a few days. And it was out of that this group expanded from the initial one, very small group. In addition to the Turf Lodge boy, and they were all boys initially, sorry, in addition to the Sandy Row ones, there were a few from Andersontown, Lenadoon, places that Ray had contact with because their families had been directly involved, had a member either killed or in some way they had been through a traumatic experience. And Ray was aware of this and wanted some follow-up with the youth in that case. And then gradually they invited friends, siblings to join the group. And And that then expanded out to females as well as males. And the group that started as 8 or 9 young people grew to somewhere over 30,
Wow.
if they were all together.
Yeah.
But it was in the very early days of cross-community work, I would say, with young people. And most of what was happening was bring them together, let them see that each other don't have horns, do lots of activity together, but emphasize, that we're pretty much the same. We never got much into discussing the real differences. And or discussion of anything. So a lot of activity. And when we were at the center, that would have included physical work around the center as part of the weekend.
All right.
Which for many people in Corrymeela in those years was very important. The work camp type experience, or that this was a place where people came and they worked side by side. Well, these young people were not doing major jobs, but maybe some of the landscaping tasks, digging a new pathway and filling it in with stones, whatever. But they were working together on something, maybe all Saturday morning, and then Saturday afternoon would be out somewhere as an outing along the coast.
Yeah. So at that time point, you were still working as a volunteer, basically, and using the center as a resource. But how did then your relationship with Corrymeela develop?
Okay, so then at the end of 20 months of actually working in a different role, but working alongside Corrymeela and I was getting to know more Corrymeela people, and particularly getting to know Ray at that time quite well. I had met Ray when I came in 1970 for some reason that I have never really understood. The other 3 members of my team went to Corrymeela the very first week for something. And I was, and said, meant to go to Belfast and to stay at the Presby Centre, but to be involved in some of the preparation work for projects later in the summer. And so the first people I met, because whoever was supposed to meet me at Aldergrove at the airport and take me into Belfast didn't show up. And so I went on a bus where I was the only passenger with an address that meant nothing to me. And after some hours of wandering around, eventually ended up at the Presby Centre. And the person who answered the door was George Gibson, another Corrymeela connection.
Yeah.
And George immediately told Ray and Kathleen that I was there. They knew that I was coming to stay, but that's all they knew. And so my first meal in Northern Ireland in 1970 was with Ray and Kathleen in their apartment in the old Presby Centre.
Oh, I see. Right.
So from then on, there was contact between us, etc. And after a couple of years, several years after I had gone back to the US and I was doing 3 years of theological education, then I was working in a suburban church outside Philadelphia, but I'd come back to Northern Ireland as part of a holiday one summer.
Right.
And while I was here on that holiday, Ray and Derek Wilson, who had not yet taken up the position as center director, but was going to be taking it up within a couple of months, spoke to me and they said, we're interested in developing some more intentional Christian education dimensions with some of our group work, and also strengthening our relationships with the churches, and thinking it would be good if we could get a new staff person to do that. we think someone with outside experience and perspective would actually be good, but it also needs to be someone who has a working understanding of our context. And that makes us think of you. Would you be interested if we're able to do this? Are you even open to that? And I thought, goodness, if I had known such a job existed, I would have applied for it. But then they really surprised me. They said, well, actually, we had some senior staff from your denomination in the US here just recently visiting. And they said to us, what could we do to help support your work? And they told them, we're actually interested in one of your ministers. Would you consider helping to fund him as a staff person? And they went away thinking, that might be a good thing for us to do. And so the church structure that I was part of in the US also contacted me and said, you may know about this, but we had this. Are you interested? And I said, yes, I am. I'm very interested. So it was that invitation and the fact that my national church in the US was open to helping to fund it, that I then came back in 1979 to a position that hadn't existed before with Corrymeela and that only had vague outlines. And of course, like so often happens in life, the way that the job unfolded wasn't very much like what I had imagined, beforehand. But it was evolving, and that was great.
And did you, the bit you said about developing connection to the church, did that happen, or?
Yes and no. I think it did happen in that I'm sure that before that there were churches that came to Corrymeela as a church youth group, as a family all-age group from a church, and had a time there. But I'm not sure that Corrymeela did much programming other than provide the space at the center at that time. So it happened in a number of ways of working with such groups and actually offering a program to them, not just a space to do their own thing, but doing a program. We began to set up conferences for clergy on relevant themes to do with, ecumenical relations, reaching into the wider community around the church, or whatever it might have been. And so there were relationships with clergy who were open to looking at this. There were weekends for church groups. There were occasionally weekends for joint church groups from both Catholic and Protestant backgrounds, coming together, not just a single congregation or parish. And then on the other side, the development of more explicit Christian education dimensions and some of the existing work with schools or with youth groups. That happened sometimes where there was a specific session that I might lead as part of a program that you at that time as a family worker were doing, or Billy as a youth leader worker was doing, and might be brought in as a resource for something specific. It also happened just by being around those groups and being in relationship with the
Yeah.
leaders and with the people in the group, and how conversations developed. It was also the time that I started, which was initially, this was to be for a 3-year period. And that was what I had signed up for. Thought I might extend it a little bit beyond that,
Yeah.
and then I would return to the US and go into parish ministry, congregational ministry, which I had loved.
Yeah.
And of course, it extended to over 37 years, not with Corrymeela, but working full time here. But the time that I arrived was literally coincided with the opening of the Cree, and a change for Corrymeela and how worship was dealt with at the center. I'm not probably the best person to articulate this, but there had been an emphasis on worship during the summer program, but throughout much of the rest of the year, it was maybe only occasional, sporadic, kind of a thing. And in Corrymeela's understanding, there wasn't a place for worship. Worship could happen in many different contexts.
Yeah.
And a tent and a temporary thing and all of this. So now the Cree was coming up, but was built, but the vision was that it wouldn't only be used for worship, it would be used for other things as well. And worship would still happen in different settings around the center. But I think what the Cree did was Derek and some others who were in, the senior leadership positions at that time thought, well, in the summer program, we've had morning and evening worship, kind of daily. We should continue that pattern year round now. Mm-hmm. And so developing the worship life and coordinating that in that expansion of what was on offer to the groups that came through the worships, optional for them, but people from some of the strangest groups were interested in, even though they weren't there, they may have been on a geography field trip or something else, but they were interested in coming along to the worship times. That was one of the ways that maybe the element of Christian education or focus, affirming the vision of the gospel of Corrymeela, was expanding, as well. And so I may have been just that guy who was leading worship the other night, and now you're on a bus outing and you pick up a conversation with someone, So then over time, the ways in which we expanded the work with the churches or people from the churches, because often it wasn't, as you would be aware, and lots of people would be aware, there are a lot of people who have come to Corrymeela and are involved in a church, but it's not necessarily their church that got them to Corrymeela.
Yes, yeah.
Or that the church would have even approved always of them going there. Right. So sometimes it was specific work with a particular church group or a collection of churches. And other times it might be offering programs that were nurturing to individuals who weren't always finding that in their church. And it became another place of spiritual exploration or development or, whatever.
Yeah. And for you living at the center?
No, I lived at the center for the summer of 1979. And then at the end of the summer, I moved into the town to a house actually that belonged to Harold Good, the previous previous center director, and I rented their home. And that was, I think, a sensible thing. to do. I spent, because my first 5 years at Corrymeela, I was single. I spent most of my time at the center. And, but I did have a bit of a life outside and a life outside. Could use that also as a getaway place for volunteers at times, that sort of thing.
All right, yes, yeah. So were you very involved with the volunteer? Did you help them in their Christian development, the volunteers?
Yeah, I did. That was for a few years. I was present in a lot of the things where volunteers were, in the reflections that they were having, along with the center director and the volunteer coordinator. I was also there.
Right.
But then there were times when I wasn't. I was, not part of that management structure, necessarily. And so,
right. Yeah.
And there was a lot of pastoral work with some volunteers, and sometimes it was good that I wasn't part of
yes, that's right.
the structure. But could be just a person that they could vent with and explore with and whatever else.
Yeah. So you did all that, as partly center-based, not all. And then what got you to organize Summerfest?
Okay. Well, Ray was invited to a Kirchentag in Germany, big gathering of people from churches and beyond the churches across Germany, all coming to a particular city and kind of taking over the city, nearly 40, 50, 80,000 people, football stadiums and whatever, with workshops and festival side and a lot of music and whatever else. And Ray was there one year, sharing about Corrymeela with small groups of people, but seeing this big event. And he came back from that and he thought, wouldn't it be great if we could do that in Northern Ireland or in Ireland? And he began to think about this and tell people a little bit about the Kirchentag. And then he thought, we would need someone who could take that on and really focus on that. And by that time, John Morrow was the leader. And Ray and John spoke to me about this, and said, could we get a group of people together to start thinking, could this happen? Ray's initial idea was to take over the Balmoral showgrounds, where the huge agricultural show had happened and that sort of thing, and do this. He thought big. And then some people said very quickly, maybe it'd be more realistic to use the university campus in Coleraine to do something. Okay. And the three of us, Ray and John and myself, and a few long-term members of Corrymeela, like Destiny Crummy, invited some other people from the churches who may or may not be members of Corrymeela, but were sympathetic and who could, help us think about this.
Yeah.
And in some respects, they were the ones who said, we were all saying, calm down, Ray. Let's start with a few hundred and see where this goes. We're not going to get 50,000. And it was some of these people from the churches said, no, it should be at the Corrymeela Center.
All right, yeah.
That has a character to it and a symbolism, a history, or whatever. And why would you go somewhere else? Let's see what we can do with the center. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's how it came about, because of Ray's experience of Kirkentag and saying, now what can we do? But why did we pick up and do it? At that time, which was the year 1980, 81, when we were planning this, that time you sometimes had to be from a poor district of Belfast, a group like Prisoners' Wives or Gingerbread, or families who've been bereaved or whatever, to get to Corrymeela. You know, a lot of other people, because they weren't part of that kind of group, didn't have any access to the center. And the feeling was, well, let's make this open to everyone, to anyone who could come. And in particular, let's try and not limit it to people from the churches, but make it an explicit Christian education, worship celebration type of event, which would lift up the connection between faith and our action, or faith and Christian faith and many of the societal needs around us, etc. So broaden out, not just numerically, but in other ways, who would be likely to participate. And then we began thinking, how do you work with the limitations of the physical Corrymeela Center and an event which you want to be open to lots and lots and lots of people. And so we began to think, well, there would be some who would be residential, but there would be others who could come as day participants, and they could be there for every day of the event, or they could be there for a few hours on one day. You know, the easy access for different people to this. And then as it kept growing, we had to think about, now, physical space, how do we create more with marquees and other things, and cope with meals. There was a lot of trying to think about how to do something new. And of course, although I had been asked to take this on as something to coordinate, the key word is coordinate, because that kind of an event was very dependent on a large number of people using their gifts, their skills in different ways, you know. And from the outset, it had to have a whole lot of people who were somehow chipping in. And so there were ideas coming from lots of people, including different people on the staff. Desi McCarnan, I can think back of, who was in charge of the buildings and the physical part of Corrymeela at that time, coming up with solutions to how can we do this? Let me think about it. And then he would have an idea that would work, to facilitate the program that we were trying to do.
Yeah. Would you say that was one of your high points, the Summerfest? I mean, I suppose my memories are, you had both the gift of organizing the smallest detail, you got a lot of people involved, and you had the big ideas and the pictures and the themes. You have a wonderful gift, that not everybody has. It was pretty unique. And I'm sure, for a lot of people, not only members, it was a high point of Corrymeela.
Of course, it was one of the high points for my years working on staff. I was actually on the staff for 19 years, I think, that I was on the staff. And in that time, we did 8 Summerfests.
Yeah.
And it was usually every second year, but there was one time where we skipped and it was the third year. And we'd learn from one to the next, etc.
Yeah.
But here's what I'm going to say. I would never have thought of the idea of Summerfest. Never occurred to me. It was Ray who got this. And so very often in my life, and Corrymeela has been like this as well, someone else has had the idea and then it turned and said, you would be very good at doing that, or you could do that, or would you be open to doing that?
Yeah.
But it was someone else who had the idea and also had the confidence in me to say, do that. But it wasn't just because of the huge crowds at times relative to, not relative to Kirkentar, but relative to what was our normal at the center. It wasn't just because of the huge crowds, or it wasn't just because of the big names like Mother Teresa and Alan Bozak and others that we had. It was the highlight of having a team of people working together so well, and witnessing that. And it was also little things that happened in the course of a Summerfest event, whether planning or afterwards. I can think of one example of that. There was a woman with a couple of young children who'd had quite a traumatic experience. And she wrote a note about was there any chance that she and her children could come to Summerfest? And this was maybe 10 days before the event, when all of the space had been booked up. And we didn't have any residential space for anyone. But looking at things, figured out, we could accommodate them. We could make this swap and we could accommodate them. And them coming, and she was from a very working class Catholic background, lower income setting. She met at Summerfest Isabel Kennedy, who was a retired Presbyterian missionary in India, who would have been mid to late 70s, I suspect, at that point. They hit it off, not just during that week, but they stayed in touch for years after that.
Yeah.
And then one day out of the blue, maybe 5, 6, 8 years after that, I got a letter from this woman saying, thank you so much for allowing me and my children to come to Summerfest. I met this person. It's been a big influence in my life, and I just want you to know that I'm glad you made it work, whatever. And I thought that was just wonderful. So there are highlights from Summerfest, as there would be from other programs as well, but are the little things, you know, not the big event.
Yeah, I think you're right. But you still kept some of the youth work going too, didn't you? Or
Yes. There were several areas of youth work, and in those early years of the late 70s, 80s, collectively, Corrymeela with Billy and others involved in this developed what we called the seed groups, and saw this as working with young people who, we would be planting a seed, and hopefully where they would grow into people who could be leaders in their own way in society, or, have this, and really bringing together a wide mix of people. And I would have been initially used with that. Specifically, we had one weekend which was on looking at faith as, part of, we had politics, we had family relationships. Yeah. So I would have been a resource on the faith weekend. And then we decided maybe it would be good to have two seed groups, give enough time and energy to this. And it was suggested that I then lead one of the seed groups, and Billy had with himself and a team, and myself with a team. So yes, I did that kind of youth work. Mm-hmm. Again, approaches were made by Christian Aid and by what was it called? I'm not remember the Christian Education Movement, which Gordon Gray was the Northern Ireland person doing this as a kind of pastime initially, not as a pastime, as a aspect of his job, though it wasn't directly under his job. Anyway, and we started doing 6 foreign conferences around world development, or around the kind of connection of faith and politics, exploring these, and getting young people from different schools to come, maybe 4 or 5 young people from 5 or 6 different schools for the weekend. And those had a fairly specific Christian education dimension to it in the youth work. Out of that, a number of individual young people got involved more broadly in Corrymeela as volunteers, or helping with other programs as well, coming up and working in the kitchen, whatever. But again, that was dependent on partnership. And I'll use the Christian Aid one. The theme was world development and looking at poverty, etc. But Ian McDowell, who at that time was the director of Christian Aid in Ireland, was fully committed to seeing that the weekend was really about cross-community as well. And so all of the discussions that happened in the free time around the world development theme that got them there to begin with, he valued those tremendously and wanted to see, the fact that you had folk from a Catholic grammar school and a state secondary school meeting each other. And what happened beyond the set program and the theme of the weekend was just as important. Yeah. So organizations that wanted to work in partnership with us, again, those ideas often came from them. And then it became part of my job to coordinate them.
What would you have found, what would you say, sort of in hindsight, we talked about highlights, what would have been the difficult bits?
Well, the difficult bits, not to dwell on them, but obviously in a role which was trying to get the churches more involved or connect with the churches, the disinterest of most of the churches, the resistance to things ecumenical, to looking at the connection between faith and politics and what was going on. The resistance which was there, very difficult to actually get in. But by the same token, there was resistance from within elements of the staff and membership of Corrymeela. Oh, why bother with the churches? Or why make changes that might might help to build those links a bit more. And that was a frustration, both ways. I was frustrated with the churches. I was frustrated at times with Corrymeela because there was a period, and I know you at times were conscious of this too, Mathilde, but that middle-class church people were kind of frowned upon. Let's give our energy to low income and those on the fringes or outside. And I never saw it as an either or. I thought both were important.
Yeah.
But those were frustrations. And worship, being responsible for coordinating worship was at times wonderful and lots of experiences. And then you could have a week when very few others on the staff wanted to take any responsibility and think, now this is my 6th or 7th worship this week. How can I be all fresh or interested in this? Or you would go with something very, planned, well thought out, etc. And 3 people would show up. And then another time you would go thinking, well, there might be half a dozen people here, and you had 80. And it's just, that was, of course, it was wonderful when people were coming out of the woodwork and you dealt with this. But that was difficult, to sustain. Sustain. Yeah.
Well, we're nearly coming to the end. So can you sort of say, did Corrymeela make a difference to your life?
Oh, it did. I'm indebted to Corrymeela, not just for a lot of personal relationships. I mean, with a lot of other people, including those who are on this call at the moment. I met my spouse through Corrymeela, and that has totally changed my life. But my outlook on inclusion, the importance of inclusion, the importance of relationships, things that organic relationships, so the importance of spending time with people doing all kinds of different things, and seeing the message of reconciliation, finding it so many places in the Bible that it wasn't just because I was working with Corrymeela that I would talk about reconciliation. It's because a lot of the experiences I had in Corrymeela helped me to see that it's everywhere in the gospel. It's everywhere. And it's not, so when I moved on from Corrymeela, and I'll say this, one of the things that I have always felt was the sign that was up in reception over the doors of the old house said, Corrymeela begins when you leave. Yeah. And I felt it was very important to let people come, experience Corrymeela, be part of it, but take that away and do something with it somewhere else, not just to get involved and stay involved in Corrymeela. And so for me, yes, when I left the staff, I didn't initially leave the community, but when I left the staff, it was because I believed that what Corrymeela had taught me and given me needed to be used in other ways as well, and to put the energy there. I continued in my years after being on the staff of Corrymeela to be in staff of other groupings or projects that were about trying to work with the churches as institutions to make reconciliation, peace building, not just an optional extra for those who are involved in something like Corrymeela, but to try and integrate it into mainstream church life. I wouldn't say the success rate there was very good. It was like knocking your head up against brick walls, numerous brick walls at the same time in terms of the institutions. But some things did develop, you know. The realities which hold the Irish churches back from embracing this more fully are huge, huge obstacles to deal with. And the realities of institutional life and the energy that has to go to maintain, sustain, rather than being able to visualize something different and going in a different direction is a huge, anchor holding back development. But that was for me, again, about trying to take some of the learning through Corrymeela out into another context, and at least have a go at it, see what can be done.
I'm sure you sowed seeds there too.
And hopefully sowed seeds. Hopefully sowed seeds, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Very, very interesting. Thank you.
Okay. Take care.